this is getting repetitive and it might be a little confusing and you might need to watch this section back a couple of times. I'm doing my best to explain a very complicated abstract term. Please bear with me, okay? So like I said, achieving your big goal is as simple as achieving lots of small ones by attacking them one at a time. And by attack, I just mean iterating, testing, and experimenting with new hypotheses. Success is incredibly easy and simple when you compartmentalize your objectives and look at them as small little problems to figure out. Figure them all out, line them up in a hypothesis string, and you will have a successful business. And the hypothesis string, by the way, is just like when you sort of visualize all the variables put together. And you literally iterate your way to success. And the only kicker here is it just takes time. It takes years to get to these things. And you might have heard the phrase before that the only way to eat an elephant is one small chunk at a time. It's the same thing. Like getting to 100K a month is like eating an elephant. Like to do this thing, you have to break it down. Like what's everything I need to have in place to get to this point? And then you break those things down, and then you break the things down inside of those things, and you get to the real simple little pieces, and then you just attack these tiny things. Because you can eat an elephant if you're only eating like little bite-sized pieces. It's just going to take you a long time, but you can do it. It's exactly the same thing with building a business. Like all of these little problems are quite easy to figure out. It's just that there's lots of them, and they take a lot of time, and you need to attack the small things, okay? So measuring experimental outcomes. So the big question then becomes like, how do you know if your iteration is working? like how do you actually know if a new hypothesis is good or bad? So as I've discussed, a hypothesis is basically a guess. And it's like it's a statement of like a guess where it's like, okay, well, if I do this, then this might happen. But how do you know if a hypothesis works or not? Like what makes a hypothesis at any level, whether in the macro or the micro, good or bad? Well, as we now know, we have goals at multiple levels. And I want you to start thinking about it like this. So when I use the word goal from now on, the goal is transcending the levels. So it could be the goal of getting to 100K a month, or it could be the goal of getting to a 25% sales conversion rate, right? When you can test at multiple levels, therefore we have goals at multiple levels and we have KPIs at multiple levels, which are key performance indicators. And this will all become clear as I go through this diagram, okay? So think about it like this, because this diagram can be extended to understand the nature of experiment at all different 3 levels of variables, okay? So we've got level 1, level 2, level 3. If we want to know an experiment's working or not, because we're going to experiment at these different levels, then we can use this diagram, okay? And I know this is getting a little confusing, and this is one of the hardest things for me to explain to you. So please, if you feel confused and it's taking a minute for you to understand, just rewatch the whole video. It's really important you get this, and I appreciate you bearing with me. So here's how it works. So this is how you can measure the effectiveness of an experiment. So we have the goal, and we have what we would refer to as hell, determined by this fire, right? The red arrow refers to regress, and the green arrow refers to progress, and the black line with the version next to it refers to the baseline. So you have where you are right now. So whenever you're conducting an experiment, or whenever you're about to begin a new experiment, you have your baseline. And your baseline is determined by your current hypothesis. So the current variables that you have, okay? Version 1. Then you have where you want to be, which is your goal. And then you have where you don't want to be, which we're going to call hell, which is below your baseline. So, if you bring in a new experiment, and you bring in a new set of variables, and you bring in a new hypothesis, and you test something new, you're bringing in like version 2. And if by introducing version 2, you move away from baseline towards your goal, then we are making progress. But if by introducing version 2, we move away from baseline towards hell, then we are making regression. And so, when you introduce something new to your business, it's either going to bring you closer towards your goal or push you away from where you are right now towards hell. Or it's going to keep you at the same level and keep you the same. So to make this concrete, for example, let's say that, like I said earlier, I find a new piece of information on how to handle objections on a sales call. And let's say that I implement that information into my sales process and I experiment with it for 30 sales calls. And it's quite a big change to my objection handling process. Let's then say that over those 30 sales calls, I make less sales, okay? Because I introduced this new objection handling variable that I found on TikTok like an idiot. And so what's happened by introducing this new variable is I have regressed. I've made less money. I've made less progress. I'm moving away from where I am right now, away from my goal towards hell. So this is important to understand because most of your hypotheses or hypotheses, to use the plural, are going to force regression. Most of the times you're going to be wrong. Pretty much 95 to 99% of the information that you find online or anywhere is going to be wrong, with the exception of programs like this that have been thoroughly thought through and actually tested. Because think about it, if you go on Facebook and find someone doing something and then and you start copying that, how do you know it's going to work? You have to test it, of course, but most information out there is wrong, and most people are wrong about everything all the time, constantly. And so if you're not careful and you start making new variables and introducing tests, you're just going to be moving further and further away from your goal. And so, let's say, for example, that your goal is to make 10K a month, and that your baseline, which is where you are at right now, is 1K a month, and hell could be debt. So, let's say that you're in a job right now, and you're making $1,000 a month, and your hypothesis is to start this business, right? And the way I've structured this program is so much in the fact that it's not going to send you into stupid amounts of debt, right? So you can't go to hell. The only way you're going to succeed with this program the only progress you're going to make with this program is progress. You're not going to regress at all. And that's what makes a good product. And so, you have where you are, you have where you want to be, you have where you do not want to be, which is below where you are right now. And every time you introduce a hypothesis, you've got to measure it accordingly. And so version 2, the next hypothesis, is either going to move you towards, away, or stay where you are. Okay. This is how we basically measure the outcome of an experiment. Okay. So anytime you test something or introduce new information, it's going to do one of these 3 things, and you need to be watching it like a hawk to make sure that you're making progress and not regress. Okay. So, let's say that we introduce a new variable to this experiment to create V2, and let's say that we introduce version 2 like this. And, we've now introduced version 2, and by introducing version 2, we've moved slightly closer towards our goal. And so by virtue of progress, which we can visualize here by version 2 bringing us above the baseline, version 2 is better than version 1. So therefore we lock it in and we create a new baseline. And this is how you make progress, is you introduce a new hypothesis, you pop it in. If it makes progress, then you stick to that hypothesis. If it doesn't, then you go back to version 1 or the version before that, and then you continue. And so, here's the thing, right? So, we've gone from version 1 to version 2, and we've increased our baseline towards our goal, but we're still not at our goal. We're still quite far off of our goal. There's still a lot of progress to make here. And so let's say that we introduce version 3, which is a new hypothesis, so we bring in version 3 and we test version 3, but then version 3 was actually worse than version 1. So this happens a lot. Just because you're introducing new versions does not mean they're going to work better. New is usually bad, So we would reject the hypothesis of version 3 and go back to version 2, and then we would create a version 4, and then we would try again and again and again. And so, for example, right, let's make this concrete. So let's say that this is the current baseline for how many appointments you get from your cold emails. Okay, cold emails are nice, easy example. So you're getting this many appointments. So the goal is to get 100 appointments a month, and hell is getting no appointments a month. And so right now you're getting like 50 appointments a month, but you're not getting enough, right? So you introduce version 2, and you change your cold email slightly, one of the variables to change that system. And therefore you start booking 60 appointments a month. You've just ever so slightly increased the amount of appointments you're getting, which is perfect, right? But then you think, okay, well, I'm onto something here. I'll change it again. But then by making that change in that month of that change, now you only book 20 appointments. So you need to have the awareness and the cognizance basically to recognize when a change is driving regression as opposed to progression. And so, this is kind of how it works. Like you can map your hypotheses on the trajectory towards your goal. So most hypotheses, most new information and most new hypotheses and new variants that you introduce will fail. And most of them will drive regression away from the baseline before them. This is the point of an experiment. So now we would know, for example, that cold email number 3 is way worse than cold email number 2, and it's even worse than cold email number 1 was, okay? Because we're below that baseline. And so after doing this for some time, you can start to map the results of your various hypotheses, always setting the baseline at the newest height and testing from there. So for example, here is an experiment with 12 different variants. And let's say this is a cold email experiment. So we start off with version 1 baseline where we're booking 50 appointments a month. And we introduce version 2. And version 2 moves us to 60 appointments a month, but still not quite there. Well, version 2 becomes our new baseline. And then we think we'll test version 3, but version 3, as we know, brings us to 20 appointments a month. So we think, okay, shit, we'll go back to version 2, but we're going to run an experiment. So when you're running an experiment, what you're doing is you're still running version 2 at this point. So if something's working, you never stop running it ever. You just introduce an experiment separately to it. So if I'm running a cold email campaign that's working, I'm never going to turn that off. If I want to try a new cold email campaign, I'm going to create a new one and run that as a new experiment. In the same way that, if a scientist is trying to measure the growth of a bacteria, he's going to get them in a Petri dish and he's going to put some stuff in a different Petri dish to test the effect of that stuff as opposed to the stuff before it. So what I'm saying is when you've got something that works, never stop doing it. If you want to test it and try something new, then you run a different experiment. And this is explained in more depth in Easy Grow. This is something that to really grasp and to really understand. You can get the basics of it like this, but if you really want to become an absolute expert in this thing, it takes 15 hours of explanation. So we'll get into that later. But anyway, so version 3 is, shit, doesn't work as well, below baseline. So we try version 4, which is also worse than version 2. So then we try version 5, which is actually better than version 2. So our new baseline becomes number 5. And then from version 5, we try version 6, which is way worse than version 4 was and better than version 3 though. So, version 6, it still hasn't got us towards our goal. So we try version 7, which works slightly better. And then version 8, which works the same as version 1. And then version 9. And this is how progress looks, is you iterate, and it's not going to be this little neat, little tidy jump towards goal. You're going to go up and down. But what matters is you remember the highest point and you always maintain that as the standard. People are just sometimes idiots where I've seen this all the time with people who test things and they just end up forgetting what works. So they'll have version 1 which works better than their version 6. But for some reason, they're running version 6, even though version 1 worked better. and they're like, oh, but it's version 6, so it must be better. It's like, you're an idiot, it doesn't work. So you can visualize it like this. Progress is never a straight line, and you always want to raise that bar, raise that baseline, and measure every experiment that comes against it past the previous highest point, okay? Now, in summary, your business is simply one big experiment with a North Star, which is your overall overarching goal, like 100K a month or 10K a month. To achieve the North Star, we must conduct various smaller experiments, because that's how you do it. And these smaller experiments are made up of even smaller experiments. So for example, if the North Star of your business is to make 100K a month, then a goal that you're going to have to achieve to make this happen could be 100 appointments per month. And that's at the outbound cold email level. And a goal that you're going to have to achieve to make this goal happen is getting 10,000 people to open your emails per month. So this is my point, is goals are they are fractal insofar as the fact that the big thing needs a little thing to happen and the little thing needs a littler thing to happen. You have to learn to think in macro, micro, micro, okay? And so the variables of the cold email open rate are going to be deliverability, the subject line, the lead sourcing, the email name, the structure, the personalization. If we get all of these little things right, then we're going to get this thing right. And if we get all of these little things right, then we're going to get things at this level right. And if we get all the things at this level right, we're going to get this thing right. This is literally just building a house. You don't build a house, you just lay tons of bricks. And building a house is about building lots of different little rooms. And if you get all the rooms built, then you have the house together. These big things, these macro things are just collective names for little components. And if you're building a kitchen, like, well, now you need to build the sink, and now you need to build the island, then you need to build the dining table in the kitchen, then you need to build like the oven, and then to build the oven, you need to build the handle on the oven, and you need to build the grill in the oven, and to build the grill in the oven, you need to build like the little slats, and like we build things by building small things. Like that's the whole point of this entire video, is just to explain that one point. And if we get the small things right, the bigger things fall into place. And it's really easy to build the small things. Like figuring those little small things out are really easy. What's hard is trying to do it all at once and getting confused. But if you can see it in the micro, it's really fucking easy. Now, so this is how it works, right? So we've got the goal at the business level, and we're going to measure our progress towards our goal or regression towards hell at the macro business level, which is basically how much money we're making. And then the business goal is made up of lots of micro goals, and we're going to measure these micro micro goals, and the variance and the hypotheses of these micro goals in either direction. And then the micro goals are made up of even smaller micro goals. And we're going to measure these in different directions. And so all of these make up this, and all of this makes up this. And that's how it works. Now, I know that this is a hard thing to grasp, and I've tried my best in making it as simple and understandable as possible. What I need you to know is that Easy Grow, specifically for acquisition, goes into absolutely ridiculous detail specifically on this topic. We are scratching the surface on this whole scientific method experimental thing. To give you some context, in Easy Grow, we've got a module called Acquisition Genesis, and I've got, I think, like 7 or 8 videos dedicated purely to better understanding how this idea works. Because you get the basic of it. The basic of it is fine to get, and you can get a couple of clients you can get you get yourself started with the basics. But if you're serious about building this business thing and you're serious about getting to that sort of 10K a month, 30K a month, 50K a month, 100K a month, if you want to just get a couple of clients and chill, absolutely fine. But if you want to actually build a business, you need to understand this on a level that is much, 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 much more advanced than this. And so that's what I've kind of done with Easy Grow here is I've got these videos from Acquisition Genesis, and these are all dedicated, like 3 hour long, 3.5 hour long. Like all of these videos are dedicated to expanding on these topics in way more detail, because I can cover it in one video here and I can give you the high level overview and give you a basic understanding, but this shit goes really deep. Like for example, in this video here in Acquisition Genesis, we've got iterative Darwinian acquisition. And this explains how to use the scientific methods specifically for one component of client acquisition that you have to understand. And so I'm trying to give you as much as humanly possible in this program, but I don't want to overwhelm you just yet. I want you to get your foundation straight before we get into the deep shit. So I just want you to know that this goes far deeper and there's far more to know about this than what I've just told you. But what matters is you've got a deep enough understanding to make decisions and become successful. But if you want to get to millionaire level shit, multi-six-figure level shit, that's that sort of laptop lifestyle thing, then you need to know more. So just a little disclaimer, okay? So metrics. So a metric is a term you should be familiar with. It's basically a measurement. And the easiest way for me to explain how metrics work, and once again, there's a 4 hour video in 3.5 hour video in Easy Grow dedicated to explaining metrics, but I'm gonna give you the overview and then you can get into more detail if you want to in Easy Grow. But metrics are basically measurements, okay? So I'm gonna give you an easy example and then explain it in business terms. So your body is a system made up of other systems. And the functioning of your body can be measured by one simple metric, which is your heart rate. So the first thing you would do to see if someone's alive is check their pulse. So this is called a primary metric, and in biology it's known as a vital. So how do you know if something's working or not? Well, you have to measure it, okay? It is impossible to know if something is working or something is functioning properly if you don't have a measurement. So the only way that for us to, if you walk into a room and someone has collapsed on the floor, the first thing you're going to do, and the first thing that an emergency services person will ask you to do, is see if they're alive. And the first thing you're going to do is take a measurement. You're going to take a measurement of the metric of their heart rate, because that's the first thing. Is their heart beating? That is the first thing that you check to see if someone's alive or not. And so the same thing is true in business, where the first metric we use to measure if a business is being successful or not is whether or not it's profitable. And we'll get into that in a second. But my point here is that the heart rate is the first thing we measure. It's a primary metric. Now, inside of your body, you have lots of other systems, because the body is, once again, it doesn't really exist. The body is just a term that we use to collectively describe all of the biological systems that make you up, right? And so inside your body, you have lots of systems. You have your skeletal system. And the metric that you would use to measure whether or not your skeletal system is healthy is bone density. So that the mineral density of your bones. If you've got a problem with your skeleton or a bone problem, then the first thing the doctor's going to do, or the osteopath is going to do, is measure your bone density. And so metrics are measurements that we can use to assess the effectiveness or function or quality of function of a system. And the nervous system, your heart rate variability, which is the amount of time between heartbeats and how much variation we have there, is a measurement of your nervous system. And your cardiovascular system is measured by stroke volume. Don't ask me what it is, I just found it on Google. Respiratory system is measured by your respiration rate. So, if you go to a doctor and, you've got a problem with your lungs and, you've got like an issue, pain in your lungs, they're going to measure your respiration rate, which is basically how many breaths you're taking per minute. And digestive system, microbiome diversity will measure this. Reproductive system is going to be measured by your sperm count. So if you're a man and your doctor wants to get a measurement of your of the effectiveness or the function of your reproductive organs, then they're going to measure your sperm count, right? And that's like a pretty straightforward test that a lot of people do. And so, not to get too inappropriate, but we're all adults here, right? We can all move on from that. But literally, God, I'm 26. How old am I? But anyway, my point here is that all of these things, all of these components, like all of these things are inside of the body, and we can take a measurement of each system in the body by looking at one metric. And now there's more to it than this, but you get the point. Every big or little system in your body has a metric attached to it that will allow you to assess whether the system is functioning properly. All of these systems in your body must work. All of these systems must work for the body to work as a whole. If one of these systems stops working, then we die. Now, maybe not the reproductive system, but if your respiratory system's fucked or your nervous system's fucked, you're going to either suffer immeasurably or die, right? Now, you want to approach business the same way that a doctor would approach a patient with a health issue. So if you've got a problem in your business, if your business is not growing and it's not profitable, then you need to find out why. And the easiest way to find out why is to measure it. And so, this is why if you call up 911 or 999 and you ask for an ambulance and the person on the phone will ask you, is their heart beating? Are they breathing? Like, is this person actually alive? Is there any point in us even sending out an ambulance in the first place? It's kind of what they're asking you there. And, if yes, then, then they'll send out paramedics, and then the paramedics will, run some tests and find out what's wrong with this person. And the only way to find out what's wrong with someone is through tests. And so you have symptoms, like, for example, you could have a really bad cough. So you'd go into your, doctor, and they take your respiratory rate, they take your VO2 max, which is like a measurement of, how effective your lungs are at processing oxygen or something like that. I can't remember. And then they'll get measurements, right? Then you know if something's working or not. Now, the same thing is true in business. So your business is made up of systems, and the functioning of your business can be measured by one simple metric, which is how profitable this thing is. Or really it's profitability slash, income. Like, how much money are you actually making? Now, if we're measuring a consulting business, then we're looking at income and profit. So, for example, a consulting business that's making $100,000 a month with a 70% profit margin is going to be better than a consulting business making $5,000 a month at a 15% profit margin. Like, the functioning of that business number one is better than business number two. And so we measure the success of our businesses by profit and income. Now, if you're looking at a software business and like a portfolio company, you look at like market cap, it gets weird and different, but just to keep it simple, we're using profit and income. The first thing you would do to see if a consulting business was successful is look at income and profit. Okay, and I'm just going to highlight this. So, this is really the first thing you do. Like, if someone came to you and said, is Charlie's business successful? You would run that by the fact, how much money is he making and how much money is he keeping, right? And, depending on your perception of success, you probably would say yes. If you think $1 million a month and $500,000-600,000 a month is successful, then you kind of get the point, right? So it's pretty straightforward. Like, you start with this primary variable. This is the vital. This is how we know, is our business successful or not? Is it profitable and is there income? Then our income and profitability, in the same way that our heart rate is going to be determined by these systems, because if your nervous system's screwed up, then your heart rate will be off. Same thing if your respiratory system's all messed up, your heart will be working faster, right? And so each system in your business can be measured and tracked by a metric. So your product system is measured by your refund rate. Your ad system, if you're running ads, which you won't be for a long time, but if eventually you do end up running ads in your business, then your ad system is measured by your return on ad spend, which means how much money do you make back if you spend $1. So like, it's called ROAS. It's how you print money. You'll learn to do it in EasyGrow. Cold email is basically measured by appointment booking rate, and your sales system is measured by your sales conversion rate. Once again, in the same way that with your body, if one of these systems is out of whack in your body, then the body won't function properly and you'll really suffer or you'll die. In the same way that with your business, you've got all of these systems and there's like a dozen of them. It's not just these 4, there's lots more. And if one of these isn't functioning properly, then the business is going to suffer immeasurably or it's going to die. And so the point here I'm making is that the primary metric that we use to measure success is an amalgamate of all of the smaller metrics that we use to measure success at a smaller local level. And to measure if systems are performing, we use something called key performance indicators. So a key performance indicator is basically a standard that we set that helps us know if we're performing or not. Think of a KPI in the same way that those sailors would think about the North Star. Like, how do I know if I'm going in the right direction? Because if you don't have a key performance indicator, like, how the hell do you know if you're healthy or not? Like, for example, they say that a healthy adult male should have a heart rate of roughly 60 to 70 beats per minute. So if you don't know this and you measure your heart rate and your heart rate is 125 beats per minute, you don't know that you're unhealthy. You don't know that your heart rate's abnormal. You need something to compare it to and contrast it against. And this is why, like, in science and stuff, like, with like obesity and all these problems that people have, it's like the only reason you're obese is because you're heavier than the average person. And to be fair, a lot of the average is definitely increased over time. But we have metrics like body mass index and other metrics to use to measure the effect of weight and how heavy someone is on their health. And so you can use those metrics and those measurements to determine where you should be. And for example, the KPI in your system, and I'm going to color these ones in because you know how much I like my color. The KPI of the system for your product in your business is a refund rate of less than 5%. So if your refund rate in your business is higher than 5%, then you are out of KPI, which means that you're doing something wrong. So KPI metrics are like, these are feedback mechanisms. They tell us what's going on, right? So if in your body, for example, if your bone density is really low, then that's a sign that your mineral uptake it just sucks. And like, if you go to an osteopath, which is a person that works with people who have shit bones, basically, it's probably not a nice way to put it, but someone who's got like weak bones, like, they'll take the measurement, and if the KPI for bone density is +1 and you come in at -3, the only reason that osteopath knows that you're abnormal and that you need to fix it is because you're not where you should be because of what they know is healthy for everyone. Okay? So that's how we use key performance indicators. And whenever you're running experiments or trying to become successful and making tests and stuff like that, you must learn to look at this, to look at these KPIs and to understand like what the hell are you actually aiming for. Because if you don't know what you're aiming for, then you're gonna miss because you're not even aiming for anything. So we're gonna also touch on asymmetry real quick. This is another mental model that is explained in Easy Grow in like a 4-hour video, 3-hour video. But anyway, so the thing is there are an infinite number of experiments that you could run at any given time. So the question becomes like, how do you know which ones to run and when, and how do you know what to focus on? Like this might be a question that you're thinking about right now. It's like, if there's like hundreds of variables in my business, how do I know what to work on? Well, what you need to learn to do is focus on things called asymmetries. So asymmetries are certain things in your business that if you work on, move the needle the most. So you'll hear me use this phrase a lot throughout the training, which is move the needle. And this basically means like, there are certain things in your business that will move you towards your goal if changed faster than other things. And this is called leverage. So leverage is basically defined as something getting you what you want. In this case, it's moving you towards your North Star goal. So certain actions in your business have more leverage than others. Like for example, you could spend 20 hours building a fancy website, or you could spend 20 hours of just making cold calls and booking appointments. Like doing the cold calling thing has way more leverage. Because if your goal is to make 100 grand, then you can spend 20 hours building a fancy website and make no money, or you can spend 20 hours doing cold calls and make like $30,000, right? Now, the latter is going to move you towards your goal more. It has more leverage. So in contrast, the website is asymmetrical. So by the way, about the website thing, we're going to give you website templates very shortly. So don't worry about the website thing and how to build a website. I'm going to just give you the templates nice and easy. But simply put, if you're wondering what to test and what experiments to run and what to focus on and when, it's as simple as basically isolating the biggest problem in the business and focusing on that. So you cannot improve the entire business at once. So your job is to find and isolate the one thing that, if fixed, is going to move you towards your goal the fastest, and you just focus on that. And the asymmetry in your business is going to be found in appointment booking, sales, or value delivery. So you want to start by experimenting with and nailing appointment booking, because if you don't, like, when it comes to like figuring out what to test first, you always want to start by testing your appointment booking systems, because you can't run any sales experiments without appointments. And also, like, once you've got the appointment booking thing now, then you need to run sales experiments, because you can't run value delivery experiments without clients. So if you're wondering what to work on and what order to work on it in, and what to prioritize with your experimentation and your scientific exploration here, you start by nailing your appointment booking systems and getting those things down to a T. Then you nail the sales systems. The reason you don't try and nail the sales system before the appointment booking system is because you don't have any sales calls to practice on. Like, how do you know if your sales script works or not if you haven't got any sales calls? And it's the same thing with trying to nail your product. Like, you obviously want to build a great product from the outset, and I'm going to show you how to do this. But the thing is the only way you're going to get better at your product and make a better product is by having clients. And the only way you're going to get clients is by conducting sales calls. And the only way you're going to get sales calls is by getting appointments. So all of your attention should be focused at the source. It's kind of like a river. Like, the river's not going to flow if the source is empty, right? So you experiment by getting appointments first, nail that. Then you nail the sales thing, you nail that. Then you nail the product thing. They obviously want to work on all three things consecutively. But if you haven't got any sales calls, then focus on getting sales calls. And if you haven't got any clients, then focus on getting sales calls. And if you haven't got client results, then focus on getting clients. You see what I mean? So at any given time in your business, there is one thing that you can experiment with and test that, if nailed, will push you 80% further towards your goal than anything else. Like, almost always, there's always going to be one thing. Now, you don't have a business yet, but once you do and it's up and running, you just always want to be looking for that one thing. Like, for example, for me right now, the asymmetrical thing that I can work on is this program. Like, this is why I'm spending like a year building this thing, because it's like, this is the biggest point of leverage for me, because right now in my business, I need more traffic to Easy Grow, which is why I've built this program. I keep mentioning Easy Grow, as you can tell. And so, the biggest problem I have right now with my business and getting past $1 million a month is I want to do it with extreme levels of profit, which means that I need to get organic traffic and find new ways to get warm leads in who trust me and know me, who want to buy. And so the easiest way for me to do that in a sustainable way that is very profitable is to build this course and make it available to you so that you can go through it, get results, and then buy Easy Grow. That's my intention. And that's why I'm spending a whole year on this. I've isolated the one thing that moves me towards the goal I want the most, which is 30 million a year right now. And I've no doubt we'll get to 30 million a year in due course. And this program's a huge component of that happening. Without this program, we can make it happen, but it won't be as profitable. That's my goal, right? So now we can actually look at the scientific method. So I know that we've obviously brushed over what the scientific method is, and you kind of understand it in theory. We've got the 4 steps. But what I'm going to do now is just give you a real quick rundown of a sort of test experiment, so to speak, pun not intended, because you need to know how this works. Like, understanding the theory of all this stuff, it should be blowing your mind, and I'm hoping you now see the world in a different way. You might want to watch this video again a couple of times. But how do we find these variables? Like, how do we actually run empirical tests and experiments and make this happen? Well, let me introduce you to the tool that made me a literal millionaire. So this is the scientific method, and this is the business edition. So anyone who's actually a scientist, like maybe you can develop some level of appreciation for me extrapolating this into business, but this is how we do it from a business standpoint. And anytime you want to run an experiment or a test, or anytime something's wrong in your business and isn't working, I need you to come back to this video and I need you to use this process. And once again, I know I'm plugging it, but in Easy Grow, I go into this in way more detail. I'm just giving you the high level for now. So the scientific method is fucking badass. It put a man on the moon. It took a picture of a black hole in space. It invented modern day medicine and much more. If it can do all of these things, it can certainly get you to a point where you're successful in business. And I know it because I used it to do it. So we have the cycle where we start by formulating our hypothesis. Once again, we're transcending the 3 levels. It can be macro, micro, or micro, micro, right? We're testing the hypothesis, we're observing the results of the test, and then we're using the results of the test to iterate a new hypothesis to run the experiment again. And the scientific method is cyclical, which means that we rotate around this cycle by formulating new hypotheses, testing them, observing them, iterating them, trying the new one out and testing again. And so in the formulate section, what we're doing here is we're defining the variables and we're creating the version of our hypothesis. Then we test it. Basically, we're exposing the hypothesis to the market to test its effectiveness. Then we're observing results, which is basically gathering data and observing the effect of the variable combination. And then we're iterating the hypothesis. So we're observing the results and getting the data, and then we're using the data to iterate the new hypothesis to hopefully make it slightly better. So we're going to be using the cold calling system from the variable map for this example. So inside of the variable map of all the variables in the consulting business, spoiler alert, there's a lot more than this, but it obviously is simplified, right? We've got this section on cold calling. So we've got the level 2 variable of the cold call system, and inside of the cold call system, we've got these level 3 variables. So to clarify, and by the way, I've changed them out slightly for this example, just to keep it simpler, but you get my point. So to clarify, the scientific method is specifically used at a micro level where we are shuffling level 3 variables to find level 2 variables that work. When we are experimenting, we are typically experimenting with the smaller variables, and this is the level that we iterate at. The objective of an experiment is to find results for a level 2 variable that are within KPI. So for example, like the level 2 variable in this question is cold calling. And if we want to fix the cold calling system, we're going to dive into level 3 variables and we're going to start experimenting with these. And by changing these, remember, we change this, then we change the thing above it, and then we change the thing above that. So here's the steps. So step 1 is to formulate the hypothesis, or at least like, basically the shell of the hypothesis. So I'm going to put chain. Formulate hypothesis chain. So what this means is we need to define, step 1.1 is define the key variables. So what are the variables that make up this system? There's going to be 2 to 4, no more than that. You don't really want more than 4, otherwise you get complex. You want to define the key variables. What are the things that really, really impact this system? So in this instance for cold calling, it's the gatekeeper process, the hook, and the pitch. These are the 3 things that we can play around with and change to change the cold calling system as a whole. The next step is to define the metrics and KPI. So what measurement are you actually going to use to determine if the experiment is successful? So, in this instance, the overall metric we're going to use to track the effectiveness of the change or the experiment is the appointment booking rate. But then each of these little things has its own metric. So this metric here, this big metric, is made up of little metrics. So we would have the gatekeeper bypass rate, which means if I call 100 businesses and speak to 100 gatekeepers, and a gatekeeper is like a receptionist or someone that's not the decision maker that I need to get past to obviously pitch. If I call 100 of them and I speak to 100 gatekeepers and I manage to get through to 20 decision makers, then my gatekeeper bypassing rate is 20%. And then we have the hook rate. So, your pitch rate is basically once you get through to a decision maker, how often are you able to pitch them? Because you need to say to them, look, I'm calling you, I'm trying to sell you something here. Like, can I pitch you this? So if we speak to 10 decision makers or 100 decision makers, sorry, and we try and hook them and we speak to 15, then our pitch rate is 15%. And then we have our conversion rate, which basically measures of the people that we pitched, how many of them did we convert into an appointment? Now, this is a very specific example. I know I keep repeating myself here, but in Easy Grow, this is covered in so much more detail. This is such a high, I can't even begin to explain how. And then what we want to do is we want to establish the key performance indicator for each of these levels. So for example, in the cold calling section in Easy Grow, we establish the KPIs for each stage of the cold calling process so that when you're experimenting, you know specifically what to go between. And so once we've established the metrics and the KPIs we're going to use to measure them, we need to establish the sample size. So how many times are you going to test these variables? Like if you're stringing together this chain and you're going to build your own gatekeeper process, you're going to build your own hook and build your own pitch, therefore you've built your hypothesis, like how many times are we going to test these 3 variables? Well, in this instance, we try making 1,000 cold calls. Like this is a higher sample, so more testability. Then we need to establish the latency and time frame. So how long will you run the test for and hit your sample size? 1.5 is make the test airtight. So then you ask yourself, what could possibly interfere with this test and skew the results at no fault of the variables? So airtight is a kind of a scientific term. Like if you've got like a Petri dish, if you're running an experiment on like a dish of bacteria, you need to make sure that dish is airtight. Because if there's any airborne bacteria or airborne minerals or water that can get into the experiment, it can fuck with the experiment and mess the result up. And the whole point of the scientific method is just to try and find the effectiveness of one variable. And so if you introduce a variable to a Petri dish, but then you've left the lid off, and then like now there's all these things coming into it, like it's going to mess the experiment up. Funnily enough, that's actually how penicillin was literally discovered. So, you know, big up Joseph for that, but whatever. Anyway, so for example, with our cold calling thing, something that could mess with the result is making cold calls during Christmas. Like if we try and run the cold calling experiment during a time that no one's at work, then we're going to get bad results. Or let's say that we have a really bad internet connection or a bad phone connection. We're not going to sound like professional and people aren't going to understand us. And this is just another variable that needs to be accounted for. So before you run an experiment, make it airtight. 1.6 is create your version variables. So now that you've lined up your chain of variables, you actually need to create your hypothesis. So you create your variables to establish a hypothesis. So for example, we've got version 1 of our gatekeeper process. We've got version 1 of our hook, and we've got version 1 of our pitch. And this overall makes version 1 of our cold calling process. This is now our hypothesis, okay? And so we've got our hypothesis V1. Next, you establish the constants and the key variable. So now you define your constants, and these are part of the system, or part of the experiment rather, that directly or indirectly affect the ability of the variable, to perform its function. And they must be held constant while it's running. So what this means is when you've got these things that you're looking to test, everything else in the experiment must be the same. So let's say that you make your first 500 calls with a USA number, with a USA phone number, but then you make your next 500 calls with a UK phone number. And then let's say there's a difference between those two things. Like you no longer know now whether the change was because of the change to your key variables or because you changed your phone number. So for example, in cold calling, every call you must have the same tone of voice. You must have the same speech pacing, which is basically how quickly you talk. You know, you've got to use the same lead sourcing techniques. You've got to use the same of everything, basically. You've got to call at the same time of the day, because if during this experiment, 20% of the time you're calling at 3 p.m., 50% of the time you're calling at 7 p.m., and then 10% you're calling at 9 a.m., whatever. Like these things are variables, and the time of day you call is going to impact the experiment in some way, shape, or form. And the problem is that if you vary anything else other than the one thing that you're trying to test, you no longer know what caused the result to happen. And so basically ask yourself, what could influence the outcome of this experiment other than the variables? So, different tonality, et cetera, et cetera. And this is called ceteris paribus. So ceteris paribus is an incredibly important idea, and it's Latin for all other things staying the same except for one. And ceteris paribus is the fundamental foundation of the scientific method. Because the thing is when you're running an experiment, you can only test one thing at a time. One key variable can be changed at a time. Everything else must be held constant and the same. If you try testing two things at once and you observe a change, then you have absolutely no idea what brought that change on, so you can only test one variable at a time. What we're trying to do with experimentation and iteration in the scientific method is we're trying to determine cause and effect. And if you change multiple causes and you get a different effect, you no longer know what caused that effect, which means that you can't make accurate decisions and you're going to confuse yourself. So step 2 is to test the hypothesis. So, you've got your version 1, let it run. Step 2.2 is do nothing. So whilst the test is running, do not fuck with the test. Don't make any changes. You're going to have every emotional impulse under the sun to fuck around with it, but don't. Let it run. Decide how many you're going to do and then run it. Remember, we're just here to experiment. We're not here to try and build a business or be successful. We're just trying to run experiments. Obviously, you want to build a business to be successful, but the way you do that is by unemotionally running experiments. The one enemy of science is emotion. And if you bring emotion and impulse and change into your experiments, like if you get 500 cold calls in and then you find a fucking video on TikTok, because you're an idiot and you're on TikTok, and then you find like, oh, on TikTok, I saw this guy say this thing, so I'm going to change this. No. Ceteris paribus. Iron mind. No emotion, no impulse, no change, one variable at a time. Be patient. Step 2.3 is log the data. So what's going to happen as you run the test is you're going to start to observe data. So you want to observe what's happening and keep a daily log of the data in a spreadsheet. So for example, I borrowed this from EasyGrow. This is the cold calling metrics spreadsheet that we use. And so what this allows you to do every day is log down like how many calls have you made, how many DMs have you pitched. If you're testing your gatekeeper script, you're going to log in like how many people have picked up, how many gatekeepers have answered, et cetera, et cetera. And you've got all of these things you're going to log every single day to measure the effectiveness of the cold calling system. And you need to log your data every day because the only point of doing the scientific method is getting data. The whole reason like we do this is actually just to get data so we can make better decisions. Building a business and becoming successful is about making the right decision consecutively over and over again. And the only way to make the right decision is to know it's the right decision. And the only way to know it's the right decision is by looking at data. Data and numbers will tell you what is right and what is wrong. And so this is why we do this. We're not doing this for any other reason than knowing what the right decision is every time. And the only way we know it's right is by testing an accurate, empirical, statistical observation, which is why you must log your metrics every time, okay? And I've got metrics, in all of these folders up here. All of these are basically just metric folders, that tell me different things about my business. So step 3 is observe results. So the next thing to do in 3.1 is verify the data. So before you make any decisions, just check your data and make sure that you've logged it properly and it's accurate and there's no anomalies. Well, there might be anomalies, but make sure that they're not of your own fault. Step 3.2 is determine success. So then what we're doing is we're sort of coming back to this diagram here and we're asking ourselves, like, we've got our baseline, which is where we were when we started the experiment. So was the experiment successful? Like, did this experiment deliver results within KPI? Did you progress away from baseline towards goal, or did you regress away from baseline towards hell? And so, every experiment has an outcome, and the outcome can be measured on this nice little abstract diagram here. And yeah, that's basically, how you know if you're doing the right thing or not. And then step 4 is iterating hypothesis. So once we've built a hypothesis, right, like this, and then gone out to test it and gather the data and observe the results and make sure they're good, well, now we can iterate the hypothesis. So, the step 4.1 is to redefine key variables. So if appropriate, you may need to run more experiments to find KPI, to get into that point of success or to hit that goal. And if so, then you renote your key variables and the result they delivered. So for example, if I know that gatekeeper process V1, hook V1, and pitch V1 delivered an appointment booking rate of, let's say, 2%, then we've established empirically in our market at this moment in time, in our environment, that this collection of variables delivers on average a 2% appointment booking rate. Okay, do you have any idea how big that is to understand? You now have an advantage. You now know that something works in a certain way. And if you do this hundreds of times, you're going to know hundreds of things that work. And so what you need to do now is recognize, okay, well, appointment booking rate of 2% might not be what we want. So the next thing to do is to pick the needle mover variable, because we're going to run another experiment, because we want this ABR to be like 5%. So if we want to get to 5%, then we need to iterate away from this and try and improve it. So the next experiment is to pick the needle mover variable. So to improve our appointment booking rate, you need to decide which variable you want to test. So now we're no longer going to be testing all three at once. We're just going to be testing one at a time. So let me explain. So remember, you can only test one thing at a time. So after you've done your original version 1 test, you can now only test one variable at a time. So you need to now decide logically which variable, if changed in the right way, is going to have the biggest impact. So for example, with these metrics here, in your last experiment, you might have really nailed the gatekeeper process. Maybe you get through the decision maker all the time. You also might have no trouble hooking decision makers and getting to the pitch. So the data will tell you, because if your gatekeeper bypassing rate is like 95% and your pitch rate is like 92%, but your appointment booking rate is 2%, then you know there's no problem with your gatekeeper process and no problem with your hook. So you want to get metrics and measure metrics for each stage of these processes, and then that way you know exactly where you're going right and where you're going wrong. And so what we would do in this case, if your gatekeeper process was in KPI and your hook process was in KPI, then you would iterate the pitch variable, because you can get through the decision maker and you can pitch them real easy, but the problem is actually saying the right thing to get them to convert. And so here we would edit the pitch, right? So step 4.3 is to recognize these new constants. So once you've decided the needle mover variable, the other two variables in this instance, or the other variables that you were experimenting with before, they now become constants in the next experiment. You cannot change them. If you want to fairly assess the impact of the needle mover variable, remember, ceteris paribus, you can only iterate one variable at a time. So what we're going to do, and I'm going to show you this in a second here, is we're going to keep version 1 of Gatekeeper, we're going to keep version 1 of Script, but we're going to change the pitch. And so, by changing the pitch to version 2, we now have the cold calling process version 2, which we can now run the experiment again with another 1,000 dials. And once we've done 1,000 dials, we can look at the test and say, oh, maybe our appointment booking rate has gone to 3.7%. It's moved up. Or maybe it's gone down to 0.7%. It's moved down. So we come back to version 1 and we experiment again, right? But in order to make the change, you need to pick your modification level. So when you're modifying your needle moving variable, you need to decide how much. So you either modify it slightly. So if the result of the first experiment is kind of okay and kind of in line with the goal, then you're only going to slightly modify the thing, because you don't want to change it completely because you're nearly there. If it's kind of off, then you do moderate modification, which means the next version has some affinity. It's somewhat similar to the existing version. But if you completely botch the experiment, if version 1 is completely off, and your appointment booking rate is like 0.3%, even though your gatekeeper rate and your hook rate was fine, then you're going to do complete modification, which means that the next version that you create of this needle moving variable has absolutely no affinity to the existing version, right? So affinity just means similar to, right? So you can modify at 3 different levels. And knowing what type of modification to pick just depends on how far away you are from KPI off of the first experiment. And so 4.5, using this modification technique, is recreate your version 2 hypothesis. So we hold the original variables, except from the one we want to change, constant, which means that we make no changes. We change one thing, and then we've got our version 2. And then step 4.6 is repeat step 1. So then we come all the way back to step 1, where we formulate our hypothesis, and then we just run the experiment again. And this is where this sort of cyclical thing, it comes in cyclically. So we created the hypothesis, we tested it, over 1,000 calls, we observed the results, we got 2% ABR, and then we've iterated our hypothesis to create version 2. And now we've this is all of the same thing, so we need to test it again, observe and iterate and keep going. And we cycle around, and after doing this, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, we'll find a cold calling script or a cold calling process that just works. Or you could buy EasyGrow, but I'm giving you the tools you need in case you don't want to, right? So yeah, you basically take your new hypothesis and run it through the same test that you ran version 1 through. Now remember that you must follow all 6 of the rules laid out at the start of step 3 before drawing conclusions. So, make sure that you've got a good sample size, you've accounted for latency, which basically just means that, you're accounting for any delays. But actually this is kind of latencies and more advanced we won't worry about that. We won't concern ourselves with that. Don't worry about it, basically. It's only for much more complicated experiments at a significantly higher level of business. So don't worry. So yeah, make sure you've got all these things in a row. And this is basically how you build everything in your business. This is the scientific method. Now, people kind of get this. You might have heard gurus before who talk about A/B split tests, where they're like, oh yeah, just split test it, bro. They're all on the right track because that's kind of a scientific test. But this is an A/B split test on steroids, and this is how you really should think. So anytime someone just says they need to do an A/B split test, it can sometimes be appropriate, but you need to kind of do your A/B split tests thoroughly and like this, okay? So if you follow all 18 of these steps, and there's 18 of these steps, I thought there was only 14 or 13. I made this document a while ago. If you follow all 18 of these steps properly, you literally cannot fail. And I mean this in every sense of the word. The only variable is time. You just need to give the scientific method enough time to work and shuffle variables. It will take time, but it will work. If you actually follow the scientific method, if you actually do this cyclical thing, you cannot fail. For as long as you keep trying, you can't fail anyway, by definition. But this is how you find anything that works. Unless you get really lucky, then you've got to do the scientific method. And I'm sure you don't want to rely on luck as a strategy in business, because it's a pretty bad one. So that's the scientific method, business edition. And you can also open up a summary of all the steps here, and you can observe them. That shouldn't be there. And you can observe them here, okay? So we'll just get rid of this. And then you've got the summary. So you can see all of the steps to the scientific method in a nice, neat little order here, okay? Now, the last thing we're going to look at is variation. So we've kind of covered variation. Once again, this is a topic that in EasyGrow is just there's a whole thing on it, but I'm just going to cover it quickly here because you need to know it. So as you should recall from earlier, information is the bedrock of a business. It is used to change level 3 variables that in turn have a major impact on the business as a whole. The quality of the information that you have determines the quality of your business. Now, variation of information is the key to this whole thing. So in the same way that if a spider lays eggs and if it hatches 500 spiderlings, you know, all of those spiderlings will be slightly different to, you know, basically account for the change in environment. This is because your environment, sorry, I'm going to start this bit again. Variation of information is the key to the whole thing. It's been a long video. This is because your experiments can only be as good as the information informing them. So this is a really important thing. Like, a good scientist is only a good scientist because they know what to test, right? Now, obviously, we can remove the emotion and do the empirical experiments and stuff, but you need to have the right information. Without variation, entire species will die and businesses will fail. This is why most people suck at business, by the way. Like, this is why most people why most of these sort of startup business online courses and videos do not help. So I'm sure you've done this before or seen this before, where, you know, some guru is selling like a course and, you know, it kind of sucks and no one really gets results, and it's because there's no variation. Like, everyone has the same thing. It's like, you know, they say like, you know, oh, I'll just sell this one thing on Amazon, or like, this is the best drop shipping product to sell, and then everyone does it, and then it's no longer the best thing to sell because there's no variation, right? And this is how we die. So this is why I've not given you the best niche or the best service, because then everyone would copy it and there would be no variation, and as a species we would die. And I'm responsible for you guys, so I don't want you to die, right? At least in a business sense, or not personally, of course. Although I don't know you, I would rather you didn't die, right? So anyway, like, I'm not biasing you towards a niche or a service in any way. This is going to be the same thing when we come to the cold email and the cold calling and the cold DM and the content processes. Like, I'm not going to give you, like, you know, say exactly this, because if you do that, it won't work, because everyone will do it. Now, in EasyGrow, we do that because in EasyGrow, there's only like 1,000 people, you know, or like it's a much more elite group. But with the size of this community, as I'm sure you've observed, if I unleash like a new cold email like template, everyone's going to use it and it's going to stop working. So I can do that in EasyGrow, which is why we do, because there's less people using it. But at this level, not going to happen. But I'm still going to give you the best training that you're ever going to find at this level for acquisition. Don't worry about that. But my point here is we're going to go through principles, we're going to go through ideas, we're going to go through how to do it, not just do this, because you can't copy and paste your way to success. You can if you're the only person copying and pasting, but the second that like more than one person does, it doesn't work. So variation is the key to evolutionary success. It's the random mutation of genes that has brought about humans, owls, willow trees, and all successful species we know today. This program will give you the variables you need to succeed, but I implore you to introduce your own calculated and random variation. So there are countless combinations of variables that we can combine to test, and there is no end to variation. You can have as much fun as you want with it, and you can apply almost anything to business to see if it works. My best systems that I've ever made have not been copy and pasted. They are the result of relentless iteration of random variables. Now, this is kind of a key word here, is this word randomness, because this is how nature does it. Like, nature's only tool for variation is randomness. So you know how on that game show, like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, you get to phone a friend. If you're not sure what to do, you phone a friend. Well, when it comes to client acquisition or business, I'll put business here specifically. When it comes to business, that friend is randomness. So if you're ever stuck in a corner or snookered or trying to build a business system, try randomness. I'm not even joking. Turn to a random page in a random book, pick a random line, and see how you can apply it to your business. Learn from nature, because you never know what you're going to discover. Like, you want to become this mad scientist, basically, and you want to become random and somewhat unpredictable. Like, you know, if I'm building a new, like, if I'm making like a YouTube video and I'm trying to think of like a hook for a YouTube video, like, I'm not even joking. Sometimes if I'm not sure what to say in the hook, I'll just go to my library, pick out a random book, a random page, shut my eyes, point at one word, and I'll see if I can build the hook around that word. And it works. Like, you know, because if you're using randomness and you're really truly experiencing variation in your business, then no one's going to be like you. A lot of the time it won't work. And this is why, like, you know, in nature, like, most of the variants are not preferable. Like, most information you find for your business will not be good, and most of it will suck. But sometimes you'll come across something that just changes the game completely, and the only way you're going to do that is by just trying things that are random. Now, not completely random, obviously, have to make sense, but I'm hoping you can get the point. I'm hoping you can understand. So variation is the key of evolution, and, you know, once you understand that and you use it, you'll crush everyone. So just to sort of summarize this video in a sentence or two, maybe I could have saved you the time, but I think giving you the context and the full understanding was important. You know this phrase of, if at first you don't succeed, try and try again? Well, that's for idiots. Because if you do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result, then you're insane. And that's not the definition of insanity, but a popularized one. Like, if you try something and it doesn't work and you try it again, it's not going to work again. You must shuffle variables and you must have variation. So if at first you don't succeed, iterate and then try again. Okay? This line here is bullshit. Because if you do something and it doesn't work and you do it again, it's not going to work again. But if you do something and it doesn't work, you look at why it didn't work, you look at the feedback, and then you iterate what you did, and then you try that new thing, then it might work. Okay? That's the lesson of this video. So in this video, we've gone through the iteration explained. We've gone through iteration explained. We've gone through meta-long evolution, DNA, applied evolutionary biology. We've been through the scientific method twice. You know, we kind of went through that twice. Macro versus micro iteration, iterating towards goal, measuring experimental outcomes, metrics, you know, variation, asymmetry in a scientific method. We've been through this. This has been a bit of a mission. This video has taken me nearly 3 weeks to make, to be completely honest with you. And I hope that it serves you well. And I hope that, you know, you've taken what you need to know from this. And I implore you to just rewatch this thing, because this really is the secret. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care. Mindset training in this program. Now, this video is called Achieving Omniscience, and omniscience means all-seeing. And what we're going to be doing in this video is learning how to see. And I don't mean physically, as in like opening your eyes. You're probably already aware of how to do that. I'm talking about something far more advanced. I'm going to teach you how reality works.